Well, first when we do the setup, I should tell them. I'll just tell you, do the setup first, which is, my name is Tim Mulcrone. I've been your polio chair for the district since 2012. And I do many different themed speeches. Now today, the speech that I brought to you is called Indiana Jones and the Secret Serum. And you guys are the regents of Rotary University, and Dr. Jones is coming to talk to you, the regents, about continued funding for his polio eradication exploits around the world. You need to understand that you're a part of this play. So you have to wrap your mind around that. So that's the setup.
I'm remembering one year when you came as a leprechaun.
I did.
With his pot of gold.
Sorry, I unplugged you, and there we go. Okay, this meeting of the Rotary University Board of Regents is called to order. First on the agenda today is Dr. Jones. As you may know, Dr. Jones, professor of anthropology, has been on staff since 1987, and in 2012 was appointed head of our epidemiology department. We are familiar with his exploits in far reaches of the world. Dr. Jones is pursuing continued funding for excursions into more primitive areas of the world in hopes of immunizing all of the world's children against polio. We have funded this for years, and the progress has been remarkable. But eradication is still an incredulous and lofty dream. Professor Jones, the floor is yours.
Testing, 1, 2.
That's where there you go.
Excellent. Well, get organized here. I'd like to thank the Board of Regents for your kind attention, and special thanks to Chancellor Weiss
Hey.
for kind attention, allowing me this opportunity to address the need to renew this institution's award and commitment for this non-educational imperative, which is the complete eradication of polio in the world. Dr. Virginia Chambers and I, in the early years, I've staked years of my life on this moral imperative to eradicate polio. But polio goes back much, much further than the 25 years that I've been at it. And if I may, I think it's appropriate, as a professor of anthropology, to take you back and revisit the historical context of polio, the viral infection of the spinal cord that targets the motor nerves. Polio has plagued man since the early Egyptian times. We know this from Roma the doorkeeper. Dating back to 1403 to 1365 BC, Roma is an 11-inch steel, upright decorated stone, frequently used as a funerary monument. Ancient Egyptian art tends to be very formulaic, with very little variety or individuality amongst the figures. Grid patterns actually were used to ensure that proportions remained consistent, even when the scale was exaggerated. So then, this stele is rather unusual in its depiction of a man with a withered leg. It's not a mistake. It's a clear deformity characteristic of polio. Interestingly enough, this is not the only representation from early Egyptian art. A painting from the tomb of Usarat and references to the condition causing abnormalities in the body of King Siptah of Dynasty 19 all point towards polio. Siptah was only a child of 10 or 11 years old when he assumed power. A medical examination of his mummy reveals that the king was about 16 years old at the time of his death. About 1.6 meters tall. He had curlish reddish brown hair and with a pronounced deformed left foot, very likely that resulting from poliomyelitis. 480 BC. This Greek vase, imported from Etruria, which is ancient central Italy, as you know, depicts the mythical rendezvous between Heracles and Garrus. Garrus, the personification of old age, is helping himself with a stick. And the high degree of realism of this artwork allows one to identify extensive lower limb muscular atrophy and unnatural eye-catching scoliotic spinal deformity that one might think, but perhaps too hurriedly, to be a depiction of a senile emaciation and pulmonary emphysema actually is characteristic of the anatomical features compatible with those of a polio survivor, exhibiting the incapacitating and long-term outcomes of the spinal form of paralytic poliomyelitis. It's theorized that Roman Emperor Claudius, 54 AD now, was stricken as a child, and this caused him to walk with a limp for the rest of his life. Perhaps the earliest recorded case of polio is that of Sir Walter Scott, 1773. Scott was said to have developed a, quote, teething fever, which deprived him of the power of his right leg. At the time, polio was not known to medicine. Well, a retrospective diagnosis of polio is very strong due to the detailed account that Scott later made and the resultant lameness of his right leg, which had an important effect on his life and appeared in his writings. In 1789, Michael Underwood, a pediatrician in London, published the first clear description of a paralytic disease of infants in the medical textbook. In the early 19th century, small groups of polio-afflicted patients began to be reported in the medical literature, but still only as sporadic cases. Underwood wrote, quote, "The disorder intended here is not noticed by any medical writer within the compass of my reading, nor is it so described as to ascertain the disease. It seems to occur seldomer in London than in some other parts. I'm not enough acquainted with it to be fully satisfied either in regard to the true cause of the disease, and I have never had the opportunity of examining the body of any child who has died of this complaint, but I shall therefore only describe its symptoms in order to induce other practitioners to pay attention to it." Underwood then wrote, "The debility of the lower extremities, which gradually become more infirm and after a few weeks are unable to support the body." In 1868, the first epidemics appeared in 14 cases in Oslo, Norway, and then 13 cases in northern Sweden in 1881. And now about the same time, the idea began to be suggested that the sporadic cases of infantile paralysis might actually be contagious. The next significant epidemic was 10 times larger than the previous outbreaks. 132 recognized cases of polio in the state of Vermont, in 1894. During the epidemic, another epidemic, 1,031 cases now in Sweden in 1905. Ivor Wickman recognized that patients with non-paralytic, asymptomatic disease could spread the virus. In other words, they had the virus, but they were not exhibiting signs of the virus. The polio virus itself was discovered in 1908 by Viennese immunologist and future Nobel Prize winner Karl Landsteiner. The existence of telltale antibodies specific to the virus circulating in the blood of infected persons was discovered 2 years later. During the epidemic in Sweden in 1911, there are now 3,840 cases. Carl Kling and his colleagues in Stockholm recovered the virus from healthy, asymptomatic carriers. Carriers of the virus that were not exhibiting signs, as well as paralytic victims, those that were carrying the disease and showed the effects of the disease. In studying several fatal cases from the same outbreak, Kling now found that the virus is in the victims' throats and also in the tissues of their small intestines. In 1931, 2 Australian researchers, Frank McFarlane Burnett and Jean McNamara, using immunologic techniques, were able to identify the different serotypes of the polio virus. Does anyone know the names of them? Type 1, type 2, type 3. It's a trick question. That's what they are named. She and Burnett demonstrated there was more than one strain of the virus, a fact that would be important in later development of the Salk vaccine. Burnett would receive a Nobel Peace Prize later in 1960.
What about Jean?
I don't know
Why?
if she was properly recognized, but there's more to that story. During the second decade of the 20th century, it became apparent that far more people were being rendered immune to the polio virus by previous asymptomatic infections than were being immunized by recovery from the overt disease. By then, polio was well on its way to becoming a widely feared periodic phenomenon. Now it's happening regularly. In the 1940s and early 50s, Western Europe and North America lived through summertime terrors brought about by nearly annual polio epidemics. In 1952, approximately 21,000 cases of paralytic polio were recorded now. As outbreaks were concentrated in the summer and early autumn, children were kept away from swimming pools, movie theaters, and other crowded places where they might be exposed to the dreaded disease. Outbreaks were widely reported in the press, and polio victims were encased in iron lungs to help with their breathing. They were often displayed in public places, such as department stores, to encourage donations for research and to combat the disease. Whether our own Franklin Delano Roosevelt suffered from polio or Guillain-Barré syndrome, as some might say, it is really inconsequential to this conversation in that it advanced our ability to prevent polio through funding. That funding, which became known as the March of Dimes, had a great impact upon the research into infantile paralysis, which led to the discovery of the vaccines by Dr. Jonas Salk and Dr. Albert Sabin in the 1950s. Here's a hero for you, Bernice Eddy. Medical research has had their difficulties even as it relates to polio, and one of these is called the Cutter incident, which I want to share with you. In 1954, Bernice Eddy of the National Institutes of Health performed safety tests on inactivated polio vaccines developed by Jonas Salk for Cutter Laboratories. Now, Salk's inactivated polio vaccine was a killed virus vaccine, but Bernice and her team discovered that a batch of Cutter Laboratories vaccine contained residual live polio virus. 3 of the 6 batches paralyzed monkeys and therefore contained live polio virus. These findings pointed to a flawed vaccine manufacturing process at Cutter Laboratories. Bernice Eddy reported her findings, but unfortunately, very unfortunately, was ignored. And she was replaced as the head by the Laboratory of Biologics Control head, William Workman. The identified problems with the vaccine were not passed down to the Licensing Advisory Committee. The flawed vaccine was licensed for public use. 40,000 children developed minor polio. 113 children were paralyzed. 5 children died. On April 29th, 1955, William Seabrol, the director of National Institutes of Health, chaired a meeting to examine Cutter's manufacturing protocols. The meeting was also attended by Eddy, but produced no conclusion on what Cutter should do differently in its manufacturing process. On May 6th, a month later in 1955, National Institutes of Health Associate Director Leonard Scheel announced to the press that the national vaccination program would be postponed until further notice. Vaccine manufacturers then needed to withhold 3.9 million doses of polio vaccine. The polio vaccine program suspension in the United States was followed by suspension of the programs in Great Britain, Sweden, West Germany, South Africa. The Cutter incident is one of the worst pharmaceutical disasters in U.S. history, and it exposed several thousand children to live polio virus on vaccination. Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, Oveta Kalhabi, stepped down. Seabrol had to resign, and I just need to say that it was because of Bernice Eddy's persistence that it was exposed in the first place. And unfortunately, it made its way too far down the line. Nevertheless, once they figured out the problem, they began immunizations again. And one might have thought that the world would be rid of polio after the discovery of 2 cheap and effective vaccines. But the fact of the matter is, small-minded people lack the vision and the will to realize that this is just a simple geopolitical and logistical problem that we need to overcome. Excuse me. In 1985, 30 years after the vaccines, there were still 387,000 cases of polio in 125 countries. And the World Health Organization referred to them as endemic. That's common, normally occurring and expected in a given population. They expected that to be the norm. But it was Rotary that made the change. One of the greatest partners to come along has been Rotary International, our organization. The commitment since 1985 to a polio-free world has been unwavering. Many consider Rotary to be the key catalyst in the success over polio that we now enjoy. It's been no small task to drag the World Health Organization into this. Centers for Disease Control, UNICEF, the Global Alliance for Vaccine and Immunization, the Gates Foundation. Oh, by the way, could you get every country in the world to agree? Yeah, that's Rotary. That's what you have done. Could you give yourselves a round of applause just for that? That's now known as the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, and it's believed to be the greatest public-private healthcare initiative in the history of man, of which you are a part of. This year, in 2026, we have 7 cases of polio limited to 2 countries, 2 endemic countries, Pakistan and Afghanistan. And it is only through focus in distributing the serum that complete eradication can occur. In 2022, 10 of our esteemed colleagues in the scientific community drafted a declaration to stress the urgent necessity of eradicating polio and strongly endorsed the Global Polio Eradication Initiative strategic plan. This strategy aims to overcome remaining hurdles, strengthen healthcare systems, and deliver a polio-free world. Since then, 3,200 other scientists from around the world have signed on from 120 different countries, and they state, we, members of the global scientific community, declare our continued conviction that polio eradication is feasible and urgently needed. On my many quests to get vaccines to every child in the world, I've encountered a myriad of obstacles: apathy, fatigue, and failure to keep the energy level high, and remind our contributors of the commitments that we made and the history that is so easily forgotten. A band of anti-vaxxers had me trussed up on a spit over a bed of hot coals until I illustrated that they too could be a part of the polio fight by contributing to the Rotary Foundation's initiatives for safe water and sanitation. Their funds wouldn't be going towards immunizations, but because polio is spread primarily through unclean water, we would be fighting the fight together and not against each other. They untied me, let me go, and eventually my hair grew back. The Taliban's distrust of the West kept us from millions of children until they came to power a few years ago in Afghanistan. They are now managing their own vaccination campaigns, reaching millions of children that we previously had no access to. Remember this slide? COVID was a major interruption in polio vaccination campaigns and drained away resources needed for polio vaccines, and illustrated once again that the critical piece in getting to our goal is funding. When the funding was interrupted, we had trouble with polio again. We can't stop until it's done. Most insidious are passive aggressives concealing themselves as friends of Rotary, but really they're scheming, like Belloc, to advance their own initiatives and position to be Rotary's next major initiative. Honest to goodness, who wouldn't want to be Rotary's next major initiative that Rotary takes on? It's phenomenal. The power of this organization is phenomenal. And there are many that are positioning to be that next thing. My position, however, is that the distraction weakens our resolve, and without complete eradication of polio, the next commitment that Rotary makes loses its integrity. How do we garner partners for the next commitment that we want to make without fulfilling a commitment that we already made? A polio-free world. I have had to overcome myths, such as accusations that we were sterilizing the children. In this case, our success has been our best defense. In 2013, when I was in India, it was declared polio-free, and I'm happy to report today, India is still having children. This is not the same old story. Despite polio, oral polio vaccines' incomparable ability to stop the spread of wild polio, we do have occasionally a rare problem with the oral polio vaccine mutating into a more virulent form. Maybe you've heard of this, variant polio, vaccine-derived polio. They're rare. Well, how rare, Tim? Well, about 600 cases per 3.2 billion. It is rare. But the issue is that original oral polio vaccine could be a little unstable in the environment. However, now, in the last 10 years, a novel oral polio vaccine is 50 to 100 times more stable than the original. So that has now been licensed for use, and the cases for, it's been used millions and millions of times now, and the cases of vaccine-derived polio or variant polio are dropping like a rock. How so, Tim? If there were 900 cases 3 years ago, 600 cases 2 years ago, 300 cases last year, that's how fast it's dropping. Those cases of vaccine-derived polio. I've survived with a lot of luck and my belief in a polio-free world and your support. Now is not the time to move to the next thing or leave the remaining work to others. This will be of great benefit to the world and, of course, to this institution. Dr. William Fogy, a former head of the Centers for Disease Control and the Carter Center, makes a compelling analysis of the correlation between improved health care and peace. Ladies and gentlemen, it's quite possible that our role in eradicating polio could lead to a global recognition of this institution for its work for peace. A Prix Nobel de la Paix, a Nobel Peace Prize for this institution. Our successful eradication of polio will build a reputation for fulfilling a commitment that we made years ago. That is a reputation that we can leverage with our partners for the very next worldwide initiative that we would like to entertain. My point, ladies and gentlemen, is that I've covered about 3,600 years of polio history for you today. And I wonder if you don't think it's rather amazing that polio could end in your lifetime and you can play a role in it. I want to thank you for allowing me to share this time with you today, a nice lunch, your past support, and I ask that you continue funding global polio eradication, and I stand ready to answer questions from the regents.
How much will this cost?
How much will this cost? This is about $1 billion a year initiative, the Global Polio Eradication Initiative. Rotary's target is 50 million of that $1 billion a year. 50 million because that's our target, because Gates will match that 2 to 1. So we come up with 50 million, he will kick in 100, and he has for years. So we are nearing the $3 billion mark for Rotary's funding for this since the beginning, and so has Gates. If you take $50 million a year, you divide it up by 36,000 clubs around the world, you get about $1,500. If you've ever heard that, $1,500 per club, that's where it comes from, because we're trying to hit that $50 million mark.
When will this end?
When will this end? So, best case scenario, polio needs a human host. It can survive for a period of time in the environment, so they test the environment to make sure it's gone from the environment. And when it is, it'll be about a 3 to 5 year period of time where immunizations need to continue, monitoring continues to be made, and that will then spell the end when we can announce a polio-free world. And we could, in theory, stop polio immunizations because it does need a human host. And it will go the way of one other disease that we did eradicate in the world, smallpox. So we did away with smallpox. You no longer receive a smallpox immunization normally. And so this is our hope for how it will end with polio. And then we'll have $1 billion a year to do something else. Name something else. And we'll have the energy too. It would be a very exciting time to think that we have gotten together and achieved this great thing that was just such a lofty and incredulous dream, as was stated earlier. And that will be a lot of energy to get together to do another thing. Might be safe water, might be something else, you know, but it's very, it would be a lot of excitement. Next question.
What if we don't do anything?
If we don't do anything, we'll have, if we tried to suppress or maintain, we would still end up with way too many, in some estimates, millions of children affected by polio. And I just reminded of if we saw that a child is going to be hit by a car and we could grab that kid and keep that kid from getting hit by a car, I think every one of us would. And so this is the situation that we're in. We have the ability to pull every kid out from in front of that polio, you know, and wouldn't that be quite amazing? I was up in Fargo recently talking to 5 clubs up there as a keynote speaker, and I passed a little polio virus around the room. I told them, go ahead, don't pretend like you're not spreading germs anyway, just pass this around. And so they didn't. At the end, I says, who has my little polio virus? And so he says, I got it over here. It's a trick question. You all have it now. You all have the polio virus. It's passed all around the room. But you know what? There's 200 people in this room. Only one of you is going to be killed or physically debilitated by it. Could you identify that person for me today? The one that you're willing to sacrifice today. If you could just please identify that person for me. That's the situation that we're in. If we all get the immunization, then we don't have to worry about ever facing that fact that 1 in 200 is going to be physically debilitated for the rest of their life. I had lunch just yesterday with a gal in the finance industry, and she's from India. And we're meeting for the first time. She's what was she, maybe 40? And I started telling her about my work in the area of polio eradication. She just started crying. And she says, you don't know, my brother has just now been returned to India as an immigrant that didn't qualify to be here. And his legs, he's a polio survivor, and his legs are the size of, about 1 inch around because of the effects of polio, which he will have to live the rest of his life, and there are not the resources. And I cried right along with her because I was in India and tripped over people crawling around in the market. I couldn't see them for the number of people that were there, and there was somebody that was crawling on the ground because of the effects of polio and the lack of infrastructure to take care of them. But it's so unnecessary suffering that is occurring because just simple geopolitical and logistical problem for us to overcome, and we nearly have. Thank you for your time today.
One more question. Aside from our club contributing $1,500, which I believe we will do, What other things can small clubs like Golden Valley do to support Rotaries and Polio Down campaign?
So the important thing is that I'm not selling anything that you haven't already bought. When you put on the Rotary, joined Rotary, you knew that Rotary this was their goal, to eradicate polio in the world. It's the #1 flagship initiative. It's easy to get lost in because of the millions of things that we do, right? Some people forget. The other thing, so the things that you can do is, the reason I'm out here giving you the latest information is so that you can then take this and talk to your families, and if you want to invite me on to other groups that you're involved in, I'm happy to. The last time that I was up here in this neighborhood, do you know what it was? It was a fabulous little event, a bunch of non-Rotarians at the Golden Valley Historical Society, where I partnered with Courage Kenny and was invited to give a historical perspective on polio. If you have those opportunities, I'm willing to come out and share that, because it's only through continued funding that this will occur. We see it all the time. We have to continue the funding. And right now, we got the UK pulled out. We have USAID is now been pulled, and we're gonna be hurting, and we will definitely see the results and the effects. We just saw recently with the money that was used to fight the COVID fight, had been previously used to fight polio. And when it was diverted, we saw a spike in polio cases in the world. Thank you.